In the heart of a bustling city, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and streets buzzed with endless activity, there was a corner that everyone seemed to ignore. It wasn't glamorous or exciting. It was just an alleyway behind a row of shops, littered with trash cans and old cardboard boxes. But in this forgotten corner lived a boy who had no voice, not because he couldn't speak, but because life had taken it away from him. The boy, barely 10 years old, had been on the streets for as long as he could remember. He didn't know his real name anymore. People around him called him the mute kid if they noticed him at all. His clothes were ragged, patched together with whatever scraps he could find. Every day was a battle, fighting hunger, cold, and the constant fear of being chased away by shopkeepers or security guards. The world moved fast, but he stayed still, invisible to most. One particularly bitter winter night, the air turned icy, and snowflakes began drifting down from the sky. The boy huddled under a pile of newspapers and thin blankets he'd scavenged earlier. His tiny frame shook uncontrollably as the cold seeped into his bones. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and exhaustion weighed heavily on his eyelids. He felt like giving up, letting the darkness take over. But fate had other plans. As the clock ticked past midnight, a man walking home after a long shift happened to glance into the alley. At first, he thought the bundle of rags was just another piece of garbage. But then he saw movement, a slight twitch, a faint shiver. Curiosity turned to concern as he stepped closer, bending down to get a better look. What he found broke his heart. A child, freezing and frail, curled up like a wounded animal. The man crouched beside the boy, gently shaking his shoulder. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked softly, though he already knew the answer. The boy opened, his eyes slowly, revealing a pair of wide, frightened orbs. They darted around nervously, searching for an escape route, but the man held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "It's all right," he said reassuringly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy didn't respond. He couldn't, not with words anyway. Instead, he stared at the stranger, trying to figure out whether he should trust him. There was something different about this man. Unlike others who passed by without a second glance, this one looked directly at him, seeing him as a person rather than just another faceless shadow. Without wasting another moment, the man removed his coat and draped it over the boy's trembling body. Then, scooping him up carefully, he carried him to a nearby diner where he worked. The warmth inside hit them both instantly, thawing the chill that clung to their skin. The man sat the boy down at a booth near the window and disappeared into the kitchen. Moments later, he returned with a steaming bowl of soup and a plate of buttered bread. "Here," he said, placing the food in front of the boy. "Eat. You must be starving." For a few seconds, the boy hesitated, unsure if this was some sort of trick. But when the man smiled warmly and nodded encouragingly, he reached out tentatively, grabbing the spoon with shaky hands. The first sip of soup sent waves of comfort through his body, warming him from the inside out. Tears welled up in his eyes, not from sadness this time, but from relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone cared enough to feed him. Over the next hour, the man stayed by the boy's side, watching silently as he ate. When the boy finished, the man handed him a napkin to wipe his mouth and gestured toward the empty plates. "Better?" he asked. The boy nodded shyly, clutching the edges of the oversized coat wrapped around him. That night, the man let the boy sleep in the storage room of the diner, laying out a makeshift bed using spare blankets and pillows. As the boy drifted off to sleep, his mind replayed the events of the evening. Who was this stranger? Why had he gone out of his way to help someone like him? Questions swirled in his head, but one thing was clear. For the first time in years, he felt safe. Little did either of them know this chance encounter would change their lives forever. The next morning, the boy woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon. At first, he thought it was a dream, a wonderful, warm dream, where food didn't come from trash cans and people actually smiled at him. But when he opened his eyes, he realized it wasn't a dream at all. He was still in the diner, lying on the makeshift bed the man had prepared for him. The hum of conversation filled the air as early customers trickled in, their laughter and chatter creating a comforting background noise. The man noticed the boy stirring and walked over with a small plate of pancakes drizzled with syrup. "Morning," he said gently, setting the plate down beside him. "Hungry?" The boy nodded eagerly, his stomach growling in agreement. As he ate, the man pulled up a chair and sat nearby, watching him closely, but without making him feel uncomfortable. There was no judgment in his gaze, only kindness. Over the next few days, the boy stayed at the diner. The man let him help out with simple tasks, wiping tables, stacking chairs, and even peeling potatoes in the kitchen. It wasn't much, but it gave the boy a sense of purpose, something he hadn't felt in years. In return, the man taught him basic sign language so they could communicate better. They started with simple words like thank you, food, and home. Slowly, the boy began to express himself again, using gestures and drawings on scraps of paper to share bits of his story. Through these exchanges, the man learned that the boy loved animals, especially birds. Whenever he saw one outside, his face lit up with wonder. One afternoon, while cleaning the windows, the boy spotted a sparrow perched on a nearby lamppost. He rushed to grab a piece of paper and quickly sketched the bird, capturing its delicate features with surprising detail. When he showed it to the man's eyes widened in amazement. "You're really good at this," he signed, pointing to the drawing. The boy beamed with pride. It was the first time anyone had complimented him on anything. Despite the growing bond between them, the man couldn't shake off the feeling that he was treading on shaky ground. He knew the boy couldn't stay at the diner forever. Sooner or later, someone would notice him and questions would arise. The man wrestled with what to do. On one hand, he wanted to keep the boy safe, to give him a real home and a chance at a normal life. On the other hand, he wasn't sure if he had the means or the right to take on such responsibility. His dilemma came to a head one chilly morning when two social workers walked into the diner. A customer had reported seeing a child sleeping there, and now they were here to investigate. The man felt a knot tighten in his stomach as they approached him, flashing their badges. "We received a report about a minor staying here," one of them said firmly. "Can we speak with him?" The boy froze when he saw the uniforms. Fear flashed across his face and he instinctively backed away, clutching the edge of the counter. The man stepped forward, placing himself between the boy and the social workers. "He's just a kid who needed help," he explained calmly. "I found him freezing on the streets. I couldn't leave him there." The social workers exchanged glances, then nodded. "We understand your intentions," one of them said. "But we need to follow protocol. This isn't a safe environment for a child." Reluctantly, the man agreed to let them take the boy. Before leaving, the social workers promised to place him in foster care, assuring the man that he'd be taken care of. But as they led the boy out of the diner, the man could see the fear in his eyes. He tried to reassure him with a smile, signing, "It'll be okay. You're strong." For weeks after that, the man couldn't stop thinking about the boy. He visited local shelters and called social services repeatedly, desperate to find out where he'd been placed. Each time, he hit a dead end. The system was vast and impersonal, swallowing children whole without a trace. Eventually, he had to accept that the boy was gone, lost somewhere in the labyrinth of bureaucracy. Life went on, but the memory of the boy lingered like an open wound. The man often wondered what had happened to him. Had he found a loving family? Was he happy? Or had he ended up back on the streets, forgotten once again? These questions haunted him, gnawing at his conscience. He told himself that he'd done everything he could, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe he should have done more. Years passed, and the man threw himself into his work, pouring his energy into helping others. He volunteered at community centers, mentored troubled youth, and organized food drives for the homeless. Yet, no matter how many lives he touched, the image of the boy refused to fade. It became a reminder of both his greatest failure and his deepest act of kindness. Unbeknownst to him, the boy never forgot him either. Though their paths had diverged, The seeds of gratitude and hope planted during those brief days at the diner continued to grow. Little did the man know, destiny had plans to bring them back together in ways neither of them could have imagined. The boy, now a teenager, found himself navigating a world that was harsh and unforgiving. Foster care wasn't the safe haven he had hoped for. It was a revolving door of temporary homes, each one more unpredictable than the last. Some families were kind but overwhelmed, struggling to make ends meet themselves. Others were indifferent, treating him like an inconvenience rather than a child who needed love and guidance. And then there were those who were cruel. Shouting matches, locked cupboards, and empty promises became part of his daily life. But through it all, the boy held on to one thing: the memory of the man who had saved him from the cold streets years ago. That brief encounter in the diner had planted a seed of hope deep within him, a belief that not everyone in the world was bad, that kindness existed even in the darkest corners. Whenever things got unbearable, he would close his eyes and picture the warm smile, the gentle gestures, and the way the man had looked at him as if he mattered. Those memories became his lifeline, keeping him afloat when everything else threatened to pull him under. Despite the challenges, the boy grew stronger with time. He learned to adapt, to read people's intentions, and to protect himself when necessary. Though he never spoke, he developed a sharp mind and keen observation skills. He could tell who was trustworthy and who wasn't, just by the tone of their voice or the way they carried themselves. His silence became both a shield and a weapon. It allowed him to listen more closely, to notice details others overlooked. One day, while living with a particularly difficult foster family, the boy discovered an old martial arts instructional video tucked away in the attic. Curious, he watched it over and over again, mimicking the moves in secret whenever he had a moment alone. At first, it was just a way to pass the time, something to distract him from the chaos around him. But soon he realized that practicing these techniques gave him a sense of control, a feeling he hadn't experienced since before his parents abandoned him. He began training every chance he got, using makeshift equipment like rolled-up towels for punching bags and stacks of books for weights. Over time, his body transformed. Once frail and weak, he became lean and strong, capable of defending himself if needed. More importantly, though, he gained confidence. For the first time in years, he felt like he had power over his own life. He grew older. The boy started dreaming of a future beyond foster care. He imagined a place where kids like him wouldn't have to endure what he had gone through, a place where they'd feel safe, loved, and valued. Inspired by the man who had once shown him compassion, he vowed to create such a space someday. It was a lofty goal, but the thought of helping others kept him going, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. When he finally aged out of the system at 18, the boy left with nothing but a backpack full of clothes and a sketchbook filled with drawings of birds. He didn't know where he was headed, but he knew he couldn't stay in the same city that held so many painful memories. With no clear plan, he hopped on a bus, letting it take him wherever it went. Along the way, he worked odd jobs, washing dishes, sweeping floors, anything to earn enough money to survive. Life was hard, but he refused to give up. Every setback only fueled his determination to succeed. During this period, he continued honing his self-defense skills, eventually finding a mentor who recognized his potential. The mentor, an elderly man who ran a small dojo, took the boy under his wing, teaching him discipline, focus, and the importance of using his strength to protect others. "You're not just learning how to fight," the mentor often said. "You're learning how to stand up for what's right." These words resonated deeply with the boy, reinforcing his resolve to make a difference in the world. By the time he turned 25, the boy had built a reputation as someone who could handle himself in tough situations. People respected him, not because he was intimidating, but because he radiated calmness and integrity. Despite his quiet demeanor, he commanded attention without saying a word. His presence alone was enough to diffuse conflicts and inspire trust. Yet amidst all his growth, one question lingered in his mind. What had happened to the man who had saved him all those years ago? Was he still alive? Did he ever think about The boy he had helped? These thoughts gnawed at him, urging him to find answers. So one evening, after years of searching online and piecing together fragments of information, he finally tracked the man down. It turned out the man still lived in the same city, working tirelessly at the diner and volunteering in the community. The boy felt a surge of emotions: relief, gratitude, and guilt for having disappeared without a trace. He wanted to reach out, to thank the man for everything he had done, but fear held him back. What if the man didn't remember him? What if he resented him for vanishing? Instead of contacting him directly, the boy decided to keep watch from afar. He returned to the city, blending into the background as he observed the man's routine. From a distance, he saw how the man continued to help others, how he greeted strangers with the same warmth and kindness he had shown the boy years ago. It was clear that the man hadn't changed. He was still the same compassionate soul who had offered a hungry, freezing child a second chance at life. Watching him reignited the boy's determination to fulfill his dream of creating a shelter for homeless children. He began making plans, saving every penny he earned and reaching out to organizations that might support his cause. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he wasn't alone anymore. Somewhere out there was a man who had once believed in him, and that belief was all the motivation he needed to keep moving forward. The man's days were long and exhausting, filled with the kind of work that left both his body and mind drained. Years of standing on his feet in the diner, cooking meals for others, and volunteering at community centers had taken their toll. Yet, despite the weariness, he never complained. Helping people was what kept him going. It gave his life meaning even when everything else felt heavy. One evening, after closing the diner, the man trudged home through the dimly lit streets. The air was thick with humidity, and the distant rumble of thunder hinted at an approaching storm. His shoulders sagged under the weight of another grueling day, but he pushed forward, eager to get back to his small apartment and rest. As he turned into a narrow alley shortcut, a path he often used to avoid the crowded main road, he noticed something unusual. Shadows shifted near the dumpsters, and faint whispers reached his ears. At first, he thought it might just be stray cats or the wind playing tricks on him. But then, out of nowhere, 3 figures emerged from the darkness, blocking his way. They wore hoodies pulled low over their faces, obscuring their features. One of them stepped closer, demanding in a rough voice, "Hand over your wallet now." The man froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't carrying much, just a few crumpled bills and some loose change, but he knew better than to argue. Slowly, he reached for his pocket, keeping his movements deliberate so as not to provoke them. But before he could pull out his wallet, one of the attackers lunged at him, shoving him hard against the brick wall. Pain exploded across his back as his head slammed into the concrete. Stars danced in his vision, and for a moment he struggled to stay conscious. The next thing he knew, fists were flying. Blows rained down on him, merciless, cold, and calculated. Each punch felt like a hammer striking his ribs. Each kick sent waves of agony coursing through his body. He tried to shield himself, curling into a ball on the ground, but there was no escape. The attackers were relentless, fueled by anger and desperation. All the man could do was grit his teeth and pray for it to end. Just when he thought he couldn't take any more, a sudden commotion broke out. A figure appeared seemingly out of nowhere, moving with speed and precision that caught everyone off guard. With swift, practiced motions, the newcomer disarmed one attacker, sending him sprawling to the ground. Another swung wildly, only to find himself flipped onto his back with a loud thud. Panic set in among the trio. They weren't expecting resistance, let alone someone who clearly knew how to fight. Within moments, the tide had turned. The attackers scrambled to their feet, abandoning their earlier bravado. "Let's get out of here," one of them shouted, and they fled into the night, disappearing as quickly as they had come. Breathing heavily, the mysterious savior turned his attention to the man lying battered on the ground. Kneeling beside him, he gently checked for injuries, his movements careful yet efficient. When he was satisfied that the man was alive, though badly hurt, he pulled out a piece of paper and scribbled something on it. Then, placing the note in the man's trembling hand, he whispered softly, "You'll be okay," before vanishing into the shadows. Confused and dazed, the man blinked up at the dark sky. trying to make sense of what had just happened. His vision, blurred, but he managed to focus enough to read the words scrawled on the paper. "You saved me once. Now it's my turn." For a moment, the sentence didn't register. His foggy brain struggled to connect the dots. Who was this person? And why did they say he'd saved them? But as the adrenaline began to fade and the pain took over, exhaustion overwhelmed him. Darkness crept in at the edges of his consciousness, pulling him under. The last thought that crossed his mind before slipping into unconsciousness was the haunting familiarity of those words. When the man woke up hours later in a hospital bed, sunlight streamed through the window, casting golden streaks across the sterile white walls. His body ached all over, every movement sending sharp jolts of pain through his muscles. An IV drip hung beside him, and bandages covered various cuts and bruises. Memories of the previous night flooded back: the attack, the mysterious rescuer, the cryptic note. He reached instinctively for the piece of paper, relieved to find it still clutched in his hand. A nurse entered the room, checking his vitals and asking if he remembered anything about the incident. He shook his head, unwilling to share too much just yet. Something about the note felt deeply personal, almost sacred. Whoever had saved him knew him, or at least claimed to. The phrase, "You saved me once," gnawed at him, stirring emotions he hadn't felt in years. Could it really be? His thoughts drifted back to the boy he had found in the alley so many years ago, the mute child he had taken in, fed, and cared for during those brief days at the diner. Was it possible that the boy had grown up to become the person who had rescued him? The idea seemed far-fetched, almost too good to be true. Yet deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that it made perfect sense. As the hours passed, the man replayed the events of the night in his mind, searching for clues. The rescuer's voice had been soft but firm, exuding confidence without arrogance. There was a gentleness to their actions, a protective instinct that reminded him of how he himself had approached the boy all those years ago. Could it truly be him? Had fate brought them back together in such an unexpected way? The uncertainty gnawed at him, leaving him restless. He wanted answers, but he also feared disappointment. What if it wasn't the boy? What if he was reading too much into things, letting his imagination run wild? Still, the possibility lingered, refusing to fade away. By the time evening rolled around, the man had convinced himself of one thing. He needed to find out who his mysterious savior was. Whether it was the boy or someone else entirely, he owed them gratitude, and perhaps more importantly, he deserved closure. If nothing else, this encounter had reignited a spark within him, reminding him of the impact kindness could have, even when you least expected it. And so, as he lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling, the man vowed to track down the person who had saved his life. Little did he know, the journey ahead would lead him straight back to the very person he had spent years wondering about, the boy who had grown into a man, carrying the lessons of compassion and resilience he had once been taught. The days that followed the attack were a blur of hospital visits, police reports, and restless nights. The man's injuries weren't life-threatening, but they left him sore and battered, a constant reminder of how close he had come to losing everything. His mind kept circling back to the note, those 6 simple words that carried so much weight. "You saved me once. Now it's my turn." He couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was this person? How did they know him? And why did their actions feel so deeply personal, as if they weren't just saving a stranger but repaying a debt from years ago? Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of the boy he had taken in all those years ago. The frightened child curled up in the alley, shivering from the cold. Could it really be him? Had the boy grown into the man who had stepped out of the shadows to save his life? Determined to find answers, the man began retracing his steps. He started by visiting places he frequented, the diner where he worked, the community center where he volunteered, even the old alley where he had first found the boy. Each location held fragments of memories, pieces of a puzzle he desperately wanted to solve. But no matter where he went or whom he asked, No one seemed to know anything about the mysterious rescuer. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment nursing a cup of tea, there was a soft knock at the door. Startled, he hesitated before getting up to answer it. Peering through the peephole, he saw a tall figure standing outside wearing a hoodie and holding a backpack. Something about the stance felt familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door, cautiously. Standing before him was a young man with sharp features and piercing eyes. Though older now, there was no mistaking the resemblance. It was the boy from all those years ago. Time had transformed him, filling out his frame and adding maturity to his face, but his gaze remained the same, quiet, steady, and full of unspoken emotion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The man stared at the visitor, his heart pounding in his chest. Memories flooded back, the cold winter night, the diner, the sketches of birds, the makeshift bed in the storage room. Everything came rushing back in vivid detail. Finally, breaking the silence, the man whispered hoarsely, "Is it you?" The young man nodded slowly, his expression softening. Without saying a word, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it over. On it, he had written, "I've been watching you for a while. I wanted to make sure you were okay." Tears welled up in the man's eyes as he read the message. Emotions swirled inside him. Relief, joy, guilt, gratitude, all colliding at once. He gestured for the young man to come in, stepping aside to let him enter. As they sat down together in the small living room, the air between them crackled with unspoken questions and shared history. Using gestures and hastily scribbled notes, the young man began explaining what had happened after they parted ways. He described the years spent bouncing between foster homes, some kind and others cruel, and how he had struggled to survive on his own once he aged out of the system. He talked about discovering martial arts and using it not just as a means of self-defense, but as a way to channel his pain into something positive. Most importantly, he shared how the man's kindness had stayed with him throughout it all, a beacon of hope during his darkest moments. The man listened intently, nodding occasionally to show he understood. When the young man finished writing, he looked up expectantly, waiting for a response. For a long moment, the man simply sat there, absorbing everything. Then, clearing his throat, he signed slowly, "I'm sorry I couldn't do more for you back then." The young man shook his head vigorously, grabbing another piece of paper to write. "You did enough. You gave me a chance when no one else would. That's why I came back, to thank you. To protect you." Those words hit the man like a tidal wave. All these years he had wondered if he had failed the boy, if he could have done more to change his fate. But here was proof that his small act of kindness had mattered more than he ever realized. It had planted a seed of resilience in the boy, guiding him through unimaginable hardships and shaping him into the strong, compassionate man sitting across from him today. As the night wore on, they continued communicating through signs and notes, piecing together the missing years. The young man revealed that he had returned to the city months ago, keeping tabs on the man from a distance. He had noticed the toll the diner job and community work were taking on him, how exhausted he looked, how worn down he seemed. Concerned, the young man decided to step in, ensuring he was safe. That's how he had ended up in the alley the night of the attack. Hearing this, the man felt a lump rise in his throat. "You didn't have to do any of this," he signed, his hands trembling slightly. "After everything you've been through." But the young man cut him off with a firm shake of his head. Writing quickly, he replied, "You taught me that. We help each other because it's the right thing to do, not because we owe someone. I'm here because I want to be, because you deserve it." Those words struck a chord deep within the man. In that moment, he realized something profound. Their bond wasn't just about gratitude or repayment. It was about connection, the kind that transcends time, circumstance, and even language. They had both been broken in different ways, yet they had found strength in each other. Together, they had created something rare and beautiful, a relationship built on trust, compassion, and mutual respect. By the time the sun began to rise, casting golden light through the windows, neither of them had slept. But neither of them cared. For the first time in years, the man felt a sense of peace, a reassurance that he hadn't failed the boy after all. And the young man, for his part, finally felt like he belonged somewhere, like he had come home. As they sat side by side, watching the dawn break over the city skyline, the man placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "We're going to be okay," he signed, his lips curving into a faint smile. The young man nodded, his eyes shining with quiet determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Not as savior and saved, but as equals bound by an unbreakable bond. The days that followed their reunion were a whirlwind of emotions and plans. The man and the young man spent hours talking, or rather signing and writing notes, about everything that had happened in the years they'd been apart. They shared stories of struggles, triumphs, and moments of doubt. Each conversation brought them closer, weaving the threads of their lives back together in ways neither of them had imagined possible. One afternoon, as they sat at the kitchen table with cups of steaming tea between them, the young man pulled out his sketchbook. He flipped through the pages slowly, showing the man drawings he had made over the years. There were sketches of birds in flight, street scenes from different cities he had passed through, and even a few portraits of people who had helped him along the way. But one drawing stood out, a detailed illustration of the diner where they had first met. It was so lifelike that the man could almost smell the coffee and hear the clatter of dishes. "That's incredible," the man signed, pointing to the drawing. "You've always had such talent." The young man smiled faintly, then wrote, "I kept this place in my mind all these years. It reminded me of hope." Those words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. The man felt a lump rise in his throat. For years he had wondered if his small act of kindness had made any difference. Now, sitting across from the young man, he realized it had meant more than he ever knew. That tiny corner of warmth in the diner hadn't just saved a life. It had sparked a dream. The young man leaned forward, placing another piece of paper on the table. On it he had written, "I want to create a shelter for kids like me, a safe place where they can feel seen and cared for. I need your help." The man read the note twice, his heart swelling with pride and admiration. Of course, the young man would think of others even after everything he had endured. His compassion was boundless, a reflection of the resilience he had cultivated over the years. The man nodded firmly, signing, "You don't even have to ask. I'm with you every step of the way." And so, their mission began. Together, they poured their energy into turning the young man's vision into reality. They started by reaching out to friends, acquaintances, and local organizations, explaining their idea and asking for support. At first, progress was slow. Some people were skeptical, questioning whether two individuals could pull off something so ambitious. Others dismissed the project altogether, calling it too idealistic or impractical. But the man and the young man refused to give up. They believed in their cause too deeply to let negativity deter them. To gather resources, they organized fundraisers in the community. The man used his culinary skills to host bake sales and cookouts, drawing crowds with his famous recipes. Kai, young man, meanwhile, showcased his self-defense expertise by offering free workshops for kids, teaching them basic techniques while spreading awareness about the shelter. Slowly but surely, word spread, and donations began trickling in. Small amounts at first, but enough to keep their spirits high. As they worked side by side, their bond deepened. The man marveled at the young man's determination and creativity. Despite his inability to speak, he communicated powerfully through actions, art, and written words. He had a knack for connecting with people, earning their trust with his quiet strength and unwavering sincerity. Watching him interact with children during the workshops filled the man with awe. It was clear that the young man had found his purpose, and it radiated from him like sunlight breaking through clouds. For the young man, seeing the man dedicate himself so fully to the project was equally inspiring. He admired the older man's humility and tireless work ethic. Even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, the man pushed through, driven by the belief that they were building something meaningful. Their partnership became a perfect balance, the man's wisdom and experience complementing the young man's passion and innovation. Months passed, and their efforts began paying off. A local business owner donated an old warehouse that had been sitting vacant for years. Volunteers stepped forward to help renovate the space, painting walls, installing furniture, and transforming it into a welcoming environment. Donations grew larger as more people heard about their mission, providing funds for essentials like beds, food supplies, and educational materials. Throughout the process, the young man remained hands-on, ensuring every detail aligned with his vision. He designed murals of birds in flight to decorate the walls, symbolizing freedom and hope. In one corner of the shelter, he set up an art station stocked with sketchbooks, pencils, and paints, encouraging kids to express themselves creatively. Another area featured a small library filled with books donated by community members. Every element of the space reflected care and thoughtfulness, creating an atmosphere of safety and belonging. Finally, after nearly a year of relentless effort, the day arrived when the shelter was ready to open its doors. The man and the young man stood outside looking at the freshly painted sign above the entrance. Cornerstone Shelter. Beneath it, in smaller letters, was a phrase they had chosen together. A place where everyone matters. As families and volunteers gathered for the grand opening, the young man handed the man a piece of paper. On it, he had written, "This is our legacy. Together, we're giving kids a second chance, just like you gave me." Tears welled up in the man's eyes as he read the note. He pulled the young man into a tight embrace, patting him on the back. No words were needed. The weight of what they had accomplished spoke for itself. Inside the shelter, laughter and chatter filled the air as children explored the colorful rooms and participated in activities. The man watched from the sidelines, smiling as he saw the joy on their faces. Nearby, the young man knelt beside a group of kids, teaching them how to draw birds. His movements were patient and gentle, his expression full of pride. For both of them, this moment was more than just the culmination of hard work. It was proof that kindness has ripple effects, touching lives in ways that can't always be seen immediately. The boy who had once been invisible now stood at the center of a movement, proving that even those who start with nothing can build something extraordinary. As the sun set over the city, casting a warm glow through the windows, the man and the young man exchanged a glance. In that silent exchange, they shared a promise. This was only the beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, continuing to fight for a world where no child would ever feel forgotten. Again,